Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Benil Dariush of my Feel Make You Go Sploosh, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and I'm returning from my travels, from my holiday, from my time off, where while I was, one night, I looked up for the supermodel's belly button I'd just taken a shot out of, and I thought, this just isn't doing it for me. I'm here, having fun, getting sunburned, but I know that other people right now are watching Kamaru Usman versus Joaquin Buckley. Or they're getting ready for a weekend of Khalil Roundtree versus Jamal Hill. And that feels like an injustice in the world. No, I'll be honest, I didn't give a single thought to either of these cards. And I haven't watched them. And I'm probably never going to watch them. I mean, I probably will watch single fights from them if any of the fighters from these cards make it to a proper card where the UFC's trying. But now I am debuting an era of Jack Slack content that I'm calling, I was going to call it banger shit only, but it's going to be only bangers. I will still be doing the podcast, I will still be doing the boycast, but my written work, which I want to do more of because that's where I started, is going to be focused on big cards, on big fights, because they still happen once a month or once every 2 months, and I'd rather just focus on those than on, frankly, what we all agree is shite. Now, feel free to be the one guy who comments on every one of these videos, I think you're just being too harsh. Someone came in on the Macy Barber cancellation card, which genuinely might have been the worst card in human history, and said, you're just being too harsh. There were loads of bangers on this card. There were loads of knockouts. There was one knockout on that card. What the hell are you talking about, man? Pull yourself together. Get some self-esteem. Respect your time enough to demand better. So all of that I decided, ahead of the UFC, putting out a pretty great card this weekend. It's the one where they're trying, is what I describe this as. They've started, there was sort of a spate of them booking some decent fights over the last 2 weeks, which I always take as a sign that the negotiations are going badly on the Netflix deal or the ESPN Plus deal or whatever they're working on. Someone's turned around, or maybe all parties have turned around and said to them, this Apex stuff is dirge. What are you doing? I mean, the Roundtree Hill card, I saw loads of people complaining about that and then had a good laugh because, of course, that's an Abu Dhabi card. So they're paying an enormous site fee for the UFC to come over and give them C-tier fights. Oh, and while I was away, the GOAT, John Jones, retired, of course, which was enormous news to anyone who hadn't been paying attention or genuinely believed he was going to come and fight Tom Aspinall or whatever. Very weird, the whole thing. He demanded some money, allegedly. The UFC allegedly said, cool, have this money, which is so hard to do to get the UFC to pay anything more than what you're contracted anyway. So he must have been taken aback because he then said, no, I won't fight him. So Tom Aspinall's the heavyweight champion. I mean, it's kind of like the GSP Michael Bisping middleweight title situation. Anyone who paid attention to this sport has considered Tom Aspinall the heavyweight champion for a while. Just like they considered Robert Whittaker the middleweight champion when Michael Bisping was arsing around against George St. Pierre and Dan Henderson. But it coincided nicely with news coming out that back in like February, John Jones got pulled over with some woman drunk in a car and threatened to have the police officer killed. I feel like between him and BJ Penn, we might get 2 murderous rampages this year from MMA fighters. And then we'll get like, does MMA cause Benoit? Does it cause Benoit? And you got to think, if that comes up this year, John McCain's going to be looking up laughing. He's having a storming one at the moment. So yeah, life's too short. We're on the brink of nuclear war. We're not talking about shit cards anymore. Let's talk about a good one. UFC 317. It's one of those ones where it's not come together exactly as it was supposed to, but it is good. Oh, and to kick off my only bangers focus, I wrote a big article called The Evolving Striking of Ilia Topuria, which you can go and read on the Patreon, with my voice reading it to you. So yeah, this wasn't exactly what everyone was hoping for. Ilia Topuria versus Islam Makhachev would be like the biggest fight you could do in the sport right now. Makhachev wants to do something different. So Topuria is up at lightweight, but he's fighting Charles Oliveira for the vacant title. He's had to drop the featherweight title because they don't want him doing the double champ thing, because that allows him to negotiate for more money. So Topuria Oliveira, it's a good fight. I think that's a treat. If you offered that to me any other day of the week, I'd have gone, brilliant. Yes, please, mate. It's only because you showed me Makhachev Topuria, and then you pulled that plate away, and then you gave me Topuria versus Oliveira that I'm a little bit like, that other plate looked really good though. So the details, Ilia Topuria, I wrote a large article on his performance against Josh Emmett called the Ilia Topuria, the V-step, the pivot, and the shoulder roll, which was about the tactics that he used in that fight to draw out Emmett's right hand and counter it. Intriguingly, his last two have been against guys where his main concern has been countering their jab. They weren't big right-hand hitters. Particularly against Max, if you watch the Holloway fight, he comes out and he's using what I call a cross-hand check, or I've heard it called the sword and shield guard. Very seldom you see this in MMA or boxing. Lead hand across to the opponent's lead hand. So you're putting your lead hand across yourself and extending it to check their lead hand. Lorenz Larkin does it. Vladimir Klitschko did it. Bernard Hopkins did it in his later fights. It's interesting. And the really weird thing about it is that every fight I see it in, because there's so few, it seems to open up some weird opportunities. Like the other guy, even if he's normally not a big hand fighter, if you start putting your hand out, checking his lead hand with your lead hand across yourself, he starts meeting you there. And if you watch Vladimir Klitschko versus Anthony Joshua, the brilliant knockdown punch from Klitschko, he steps in and Joshua puts his arm up across as if to cross forearms. Like it's Bob Wall and Bruce Lee starting in the Kakie in their fight in Enter the Dragon with their wrists hooked around each other. It's really interesting. If you keep going for it, the other guy starts reaching to meet you there. And that happened in the Topuria Holloway fight, the last knockdown. Or sorry, the big punch that starts the beginning of the end for Holloway. Topuria walks towards him with his hand across himself, like he's looking at his own watch, like he's about to put his forearm against Max's, like they're fencing. Max starts reaching out to him and he drops the hand and throws a left hook and then comes over the top of the right hand. It's really interesting that just a little bit of hand fighting in that way can get the other guy reaching at you, and then you can just drop the hand fighting altogether. So if you want details on hand fighting, particularly that sort of cross hand fighting stuff, again, go read that article. The other one that was interesting in the Holloway fight was that he was putting his left hand, swinging his left hand out like to throw a left hook, but catching Holloway's rear hand and pulling it down so that he could move his head in front of Holloway's rear shoulder without worrying about getting hit in the face. Again, talked about this all in the article, but there's two kinds of hand traps, really. There's the kind where you use your hand to rip down their guard and land the punch better, so you remove the obstruction to your punch. And there's the kind where you remove the likely counter. So Fedor versus Zulu is the example I always use. He uses his right hand to slap down Zulu's lead hand and then puts his head right on Zulu's lead shoulder to throw the left hook. The hand trap doesn't help the left hook land. The hand trap helps Fedor bum rush in, basically. He puts his head right on where the jab should be. And Topuria, multiple times in that Holloway fight, he reaches out and tears down Holloway's right hand and rushes into the space where it should be marking, or where he would get hit with the straight right hand. There is lots going on in that performance. Go read the article, but that's where we are. It is Topuria. He's the basics, but he finds interesting ways to apply those basics differently against different kinds of fighter. If you look at that Josh Emmett fight, it's completely different to the Holloway and Volkanovski fights. Charles Oliveira, I think he's had a sort of similar career run to someone like Anderson Silva, where I feel like his physical prime maybe didn't match up with his ability prime. Anderson Silva was pretty old and had been fighting a long time by the time that he sort of got things together. Charles Oliveira has been fighting for like 15 years and then maybe in the last 6, really put it all together. Well, he was the man of COVID, wasn't he? So maybe 6, 7 is the perfect sort of number for that. There was a bit where he took some time off to fight like less dangerous opponents, maybe 4 or 5 back to back, and he really came along in leaps and bounds. And then he fought Kevin Lee. Poor old Kevin Lee, he just got into PFL and got smoked by one of their top guys. He's always talking about how his knees are basically shot, and it's the fight with Oliveira that did it. All the leg entanglements and rolling through on them. Oliveira doesn't come close to submitting with a leg lock, but he keeps buckling his knees inwards, and Kevin Lee blames that for his repeated knee injuries. Actually, that's kind of interesting. We've got Charles Oliveira and Pantoia on the same card, and they're the two guys I think use leg attacks best in all of MMA. They've got one submission between them in like 60 fights by leg lock, but the way that they use the leg locks to turn the guy away and keep buckling his knee in really is what guys should be looking for in MMA. But Oliveira striking, I love it. It's kind of where Ilia Topuria, again, read the article, but like a lot of his success is basics, but with the correct context. So if you look at how he landed the low kick when Holloway and Volkanovski were circling, he threw 6 against Volkanovski and landed 5, and each of them buckled his leg in. He threw 16 against Holloway, 15 landed, and you could see Holloway was hating it. Holloway had just come off a fight with Justin Gaethje, one of the hardest low kickers in MMA, and he hadn't been bothered at all because he wasn't getting caught out of position. It's throwing these things at the right time that makes all the difference. And it's the same with the Topuria overhand. If you look at how he melts people along the fence, the stuff against Holloway, he was adding like a double jab and a feint stutter jab to push Holloway back, and then he'd enter when he got near the fence. And his brother does similar things. I've been talking about that Thickness Topuria fight for a while because it was really a weird mirror match with Volkanovski in the corner of Thickness and Ilia Topuria in the corner of his brother. And a lot of the elements played out the same. Thickness was looking for the left kick to the body and head on the open side on Topuria's right side, jabbing and wheeling around. Anyway, sorry, back to Charles Oliveira. His striking is a lot more lots and lots of time on the mitts, which I'm sure Topuria spends tons of time on the mitts and on the pads and so on. But when someone has a striking style that's like, I do this and I do it mechanically well and it's fast and it's sharp and I throw the things that I know whenever I enter, it's a little bit different to a guy who creates the perfect opportunity to land the things he wants. If you look at the Ilia Topuria overhand, he finds it at the perfect spots all the time. He'll draw the jab and inside parry it. He'll go across the top of the jab with the cross counter. He'll corner the guy or get into the fence so that he can swing in the overhand and then follow up with combinations. He'll reach for the rear hand, strip that down as he comes in with the overhand. Ilia Topuria, it really is like Glover Teixeira if Glover Teixeira didn't just do the one thing over and over again. If Glover Teixeira said, I want to do that one thing over and over again, but I'll do other stuff to make it work. Because Glover Teixeira came in with a looping right hand every single time throughout his entire career. And if the opponent was jabbing, it would be the perfect counterpunch and he'd murk them. And if the opponent wasn't doing anything, he would lumber forward behind his right hand, face first. And if the opponent was uppercutting, say they were Rumble Johnson or Alexander Gustafsson, he got murked. So yeah, Topuria is a very clever striker in how he makes things happen. Again, the context, the ring craft, the creating the openings to make stuff land better. Charles Oliveira is a guy who's recently found, well, not recently, 5 years ago, worked out he had dynamite in his hands and just has quite crisp punching form, kicking form. If you look at the left hook he landed on Chandler in their first fight, I think that's one of the prettiest punches in MMA history. Maybe that and Vicente Luque's versus Bilal Muhammad in their first fight. Or maybe one of Roman Zensov's. He had a really good left hook for MMA. But he kind of leapt with it. I'm talking about like staying on the spot, pulling back into your stance and throwing the left hook. One of the things that really, for me, we could talk about like Charles Oliveira slowing down and not looking that great against Michael Chandler, who was himself looking like a punching bag. But one of the things that really, for me, says a lot about a fight is how confident is Charles Oliveira kicking? Because I've only seen one fight where he was worried about kicking, and that was the Islam Makhachev fight. He's gone in with guys who want to take him down and gone out and kicked them in the body. Guys like Kevin Lee, guys like Arman Sarukian. He's comfortable being underneath Arman Sarukian, and he's still like managed to spook himself into not kicking against Islam Makhachev. Beneil Dariush, he kicked against him. He ended up on the bottom. He was so confident in his guard. He just attacked, got up, and went back to work. And then he obviously head kicked him. But that Makhachev fight, he comes in not kicking. And it's like, you just lost half your weapons. Makhachev's probably a slicker boxer, to be honest. He's not just mechanics. Sometimes his punches look a little weird, but he's good at reading and countering and keeping himself safe. Whereas Charles Oliveira has nice mechanics, but not the most defensively savvy fighter, not the best at getting out of the way of things. So that always was interesting to me, and it makes me, it's that one and the Arman Sarukian rematch for Makhachev that I'm really kind of sad that they haven't happened. I mean, both of those were booked to happen. They just didn't happen because of injuries and so on. You could get mad at the people who were injured or whatever, but I find it hard to get mad at Islam Makhachev because it's not his job to hang around waiting for other guys to challenge him if he's got other challenges he wants to pursue. But I do feel like it's kind of sad we never got to see those two guys get their rematches against him and see what they gleaned from their first fights with him. And the body kicking is huge for Charles Oliveira. The front kicks to the body. If you remember the Kevin Lee fight, he's throwing front kicks and Kevin Lee eventually grabs one, just sort of runs him with his head down and Oliveira guillotines him. But the constant front kicks to the body, if you watch the Poirier fight, they're awful. People hate them. And they're really, I say it every time, but commentators don't talk about them. They're not very glamorous. Tony Ferguson used to throw dozens a fight, and then by the fourth round, people are like, he just tires them out with his pace. And I'm going, he kicked him in the body like 40 times. I get that he's a cardio freak, but you're not talking about the fact that he's constantly kicking them in the body. So whether Oliveira feels comfortable doing that is an interesting one. Holloway had decent success kicking the body against Topuria, but some of that was helped along by the fact that Topuria was doing that weird cross-sword guard thing. His left elbow was always high, so Holloway was able to throw the right front kick to the body, and then he also turned that into like that jumping, stamping side kick with his right leg that actually was working really well. Topuria didn't like that at all. Gaethje hated that as well. But front kicks to the body I like. Trying to sneak the body kicks underneath the arm, like round kicks to the body underneath the arm, like Volkanovski was trying to do, I do not like that. Not a fan against Ilia Topuria. Because if you watch not the end of the Volkanovski fight, but just before it, there is an exchange where Volkanovski gets back to the fence and he did what I'm always banging on about Shara Bullet doing. His opponent's lunging in at him on the fence and he goes onto one leg and throws the softest body kick you've ever seen to eat an overhand. It's like, do you think those are even? You're not scoring points here. It's not a point fighting contest. He can smoke you if his lands. You are not going to stop him with that flicky body kick as you go backwards and lean on the fence. That's a huge factor. Charles Oliveira on the fence. Charles Oliveira doesn't often get on the fence because he's often pushing forwards. And the way that he does that is that if the opponent comes back into him, he grabs the double collar tie and starts kneeing them, or he grabs the clinch and takes them down. Can he do that against Topuria? I want to see him in the clinch. I want to see him trying to wrestle Topuria, because Topuria has got to that phase where this happens to a lot of grapplers when they start striking. People go, and you can't even take him down because he's such a strong grappler. It's like you've not seen him grapple in 3-4 years. He took Holloway down for half a second twice in the first round. And then he was getting tired by round 3. Do you think that he's the guy who wrestles all the time anymore? That used to be him back when he had that Cage Warriors fight, and before that, before he worked out he could smoke people, he was a grappler, but he hasn't had to call on it in a while, and he was doing it against much worse opponents than guys like Charles Oliveira, and much smaller opponents than guys like Charles Oliveira. I would be trying to stick to this man in the clinch because I think, kicking and then get into the clinch, and I think when you enter a clinch with him, don't reach, because I saw there were several times when Holloway got caught reaching. I think he got knocked out reaching. Volkanovski was reaching for the head when he got knocked out. Topuria does very well, particularly when he enters off that overhand right, of like getting in people's faces, but not quite close enough to clinch. And he hit Max with a brilliant left hook from that sort of in-betweeny space there where Max was reaching for him. I think if you're going to try and tie him up, hands up, elbows high, try and headbutt him. Don't actually try and headbutt him, but put your head on his, and then he's not going to knock you out while you're trying to clinch him. You can't be reaching out hands first for him. I don't like that at all. I think a lot of this is how sort of over the hill is Charles Oliveira, because he's 35 and he's been fighting forever. And Ilia Topuria is at the height of his powers. He's looked just better and better every time we've seen him. I think this fight goes a bit differently if it's current Ilia Topuria versus world champion Charles Oliveira. But we'll see. It's nice to have something to care about, though. There's actually some other really good fights on this card. Alexandre Pantoia versus Kai Kara France is a really interesting matchup. They've also done something they very rarely do. The other really good example of this, I think, that I can remember was it Khabib versus McGregor? They had Tony Ferguson versus Anthony Pettis on the same card, and that's perfect. If it's a big pay-per-view event, get the guy who's going to fight next on the same schedule as the guy he's going to be challenging, and make sure that everyone sees it. It's so simple, and they almost never do it. So you got Joshua Van versus Brandon Royval, which presumably is going to be, well, if Joshua Van wins, I imagine he gets the shot at the winner of Kara France Pantoja. But Pantoja Kara France, a rematch of their 2016 Ultimate Fighter fight. But to be honest, I'm going to be completely honest with you, didn't pull it up, haven't watched it in a very long time since I did my first article on Pantoja. But that era of Pantoja, he's kind of crazy now, but he was really crazy back then. Like, he just ran at people doubling and tripling overhand rights, in the way that Bruno Silva did against Joshua Van and got beat up. But he basically just tanked damage and threw right hands. If you watch his first fight with Brandon Moreno, which I think was the fight before that, only a week earlier, that's wild. He just ran at him throwing overhands. And Brandon Moreno was clearly the better striker, technically, mechanically, but he was, all the dog disappeared from him just because Pantoja outdogged him. I see positive trends in Pantoja's striking. He had the famous kickboxing clinic against Manel Kape, but his fight with, I think it was the most recent one against Asakura, he landed some nice left hooks, which was a really nice change of pace because he's been overhand right and low kick and the odd jab, because the jab is, it's an arm punch a lot of the time. But he's actually started learning to throw the left hook a little bit now. Late in the day, but still. 35 is a great age to start throwing your first left hook. Wait, is this would this be one of the 2 fights to have broken the curse? And I don't know if we count the Volkanovski one because it was for a vacant title. This is for the real deal. This isn't some made up nonsense to get him accolades. Pantoja has done everything. Like, he's got, what is he, 9-0 against the top 5? Unbelievable. So people have said, like, why is Kai Kara France getting the fight? He's got 1 win since he lost to Albazi back in 2023, and he lost to Moreno, got stopped in 2022. The win was impressive. He smoked Steve Erceg, who was looking really good in a title fight against Pantoja, but maybe was brought on a little bit fast. But also, this is like the best guy or the highest ranked guy that Pantoja hasn't fought before. This is something new. They're starting to get Demetrius Johnson problems with Alexandre Pantoja. But because he doesn't look pretty, I mean, he's a pretty dude when he had long hair, but he's not pretty anymore. But because his style doesn't look pretty a lot of the time, people don't give him the same respect. I am saying that I've noticed a positive trend on reception of Pantoja in sort of like the last year. But this guy is everything you should want from a champion. Like, he just goes out there, he fights in a aggressive way, trying to finish people, and he's beaten everyone they put in front of him. And he does it like every 6 months or less. I have a Filthy Casuals guide that you can watch on Pantoja and the Reap, the leg entry he uses to get off the bottom. Very cool technique that people should be stealing in MMA because it's easy to get into, and it stops the guy beating you to death from top half guard. He did it against Royval in round 4 when he was absolutely gassed and Royval was on top of him. He just went, nope, turning your knee away from me, and Royval had to turn his back, spin back through, and then Pantoja was out of trouble. I loved some of the tripping in both the Erceg and the Kai Asakura fights. He does a beautiful power twist, which is where you get the body lock and step your knee to the middle and turn towards your back leg, so that you're turning the guy basically over your thigh and knee, the one that's between his legs. And then he did that, and Asakura or Erceg, whoever it was, hopped, and he swept the foot with the same leg that he put in the middle. He just picked it up and swept the foot. It was gorgeous. He's got some really nice takedowns. Meanwhile, Kai Kara France, I saw people debating whether he is actually a hitter. What I like about Kai, he stopped Cody Garbrandt, but it was like the ghost of Cody Garbrandt and Rogerio Bontorin. What I like about Kai Kara France, which I've mentioned before, is that he's a small man in a small division where you can't just pump out arm punches and knock people out like heavyweight. The weight of your limb is probably not going to do it. But he often drops the output a bit to throw good weighted punches. The fight I really think about when I'm thinking of this, well, the Erceg fight was actually a pretty good example, but the Askar Askarov fight, bloody hell, that was his last win before Erceg back in March 2022. But the Askar Askarov fight I thought was a clinic. He's defending all the takedowns, he's wrestling beautifully, and he's throwing big jabs. Like, he steps in and down on his jab. He falls into it and jacks Askarov's face back, and big uppercuts that if he lands, it hurts a lot. If he misses, Askarov goes, oh my God, better not shoot a takedown that recklessly again. It's just a really nice performance, and he does land heavy, even though he doesn't get the finish. I think for both of them, I'd be like, invest in the body, please. You probably got more chance of Kai Kara-France having the tools to do that. Pantoja really is big swings to the head and low kicks. He doesn't really value bodywork much. I've seen him neither body well along the fence and so on, but I would have much more faith in Kai Kara-France knowing how to score points to the body from a striking exchange. But both of them, like Kai Kara-France obviously got famously stopped by Brandon Moreno with a liver kick, but Pantoja, the gas tank is always his problem. It always has been. He fights his heart out, but in about round 4, he has to be left alone for a bit so that he can get his second wind and come out in round 5. So if you start getting to the body, and Kai Kara-France actually has a really good body jab, if you start getting to the body early, maybe you can cause him some real problems. And the other thing that I love about the body jab, of course, is that it is a great anti-wrestler technique because your hands are low. If the guy ducks in on you as you're body jabbing, he's going to go on top of your arm, which gives you an underhook. You put your hips back, you lift them up with the underhook, you get yourself into a nice over-under clinch or whatever. Obviously, Pantoja is good at tripping from the clinch, but it's better than just being run over by a double leg. Royval style, every time Royval does anything. Oh, I've been knocked over again. Speaking of Royval, that's the co-main event, Royval versus Van. Again, the Van stuff. The Vaninator, I say it every time, but this guy is just fighting so frequently. This will be his, I believe, 6th fight since July 2024, so that'll be 6 fights in a calendar year. And he got knocked out in that first one of the calendar year, but he's looked sensational, and he improves so quickly. It's just, I do worry about the burnout. But it's a way of him making his fighting viable. He's probably not hurting for money, especially, I think he got a bonus for the last one where he knocked the dude out. And it also means you can fight through your contract. People have been hitting me up like, what do you think about Jack Della Maddalena licking boot or whatever? And I'm glad that he's making some money at last, because obviously he's been fighting through the Australian regional scene where there is no money. Guys tend to, in sports, realise too late that they were worth a lot more than what they were happy with back in the day. But Jack Della Maddalena did the very smart thing of fighting through his initial contract as fast as possible, which not only meant that he could, get through it and renegotiate, but also if you fight 3 times in 9 months, in this era of just like people desperately needing any sort of fighter they recognize to cling on to, if it's Joe Bloggs versus Joe Bloggs, Kurt Schlub versus Tucker Lutz, one of those is a real name. Seeing the guy that you recognize, that really helps. So getting that familiarity by running through his fights as fast as possible. And also, it helps that he was finishing people. Jack Della Maddalena put himself in a really good position to renegotiate his contract quite quickly. Josh Van has probably done the same thing. God knows, in half these cards this year, I've been like, oh, it's awful. Oh, but Josh Van's on the card. Oh, that'll be good. How is he against Royval? I mean, Royval's been a little bit more measured lately. He's a big, tall guy for the division, and seeing him try and use that has been intriguing. I like when he goes southpaw. If you remember the Charles Johnson fight, going southpaw, circling off, and then intercepting Van as he steps forward with the left straight from southpaw worked really well. Bruno Silva was doing this awful overhand and getting chinned on the return constantly in their fight in Bruno Silva versus Josh Van. But when he switched to southpaw, circled off and threw the left straight as Van moved forward to meet him, he landed. Again, it's a blind spot in Van's defense, it seems. Brandon Royval can fight southpaw. Don't know if he'll use this strategy or tactic rather, but it would be a good thing to see from him. And of course, you compare that with the high kick. Get him parrying, throw up the high kick. It also keeps the exchange a little bit cleaner. You don't want to, like what Bruno Silva was getting in trouble with, he'd throw a big overhand and he was trying to run past Van, but he'd throw a big overhand, that would land on Van's forearm or whatever, and Van would hit him on return. I called it accumulating interest. He gets to hit you twice every time that you throw a big swing and he blocks it or slips it. And that's where guys get melted. You keep it nice, southpaw versus orthodox matchup, you keep your lead feet clashing with each other, you throw a good left straight and you move away. or you tie up and try and knee him in the head. For Josh Van, do what you do. I think, I mean, Royval's got a decent gas tank, but I think the pace of fight he has, Van does great pressuring people and getting up to them over and over again and just accumulating damage. I do wonder if that just feeds into the Brandon Royval, let's have a wild-ass scrap of old, the old Brandon Royval. Time to get back to the old me. And there's always the question mark of Brandon Royval's wrestling. I thought he did some decent stuff against Tyra and Moreno recently. Even against Pantoja, there were moments of surprise given how bad he'd looked until then. But Van has been improving his wrestling and using it offensively in his fights. I mean, I think he took down Ray Saruya, which is crazy. Because he was like a whatever, Junior Olympics, whatever that is. But he's decently accomplished on the world stage. This is actually an interesting card because I saw, I think it was Heavy Hands called it like the please believe we've got stuff for the future card. Because they basically put on their young up-and-comers and the guy that they hope is going to be the future Ilia Topuria. Topuria, Van, Peyton Talbot, Felipe Lima, both up-and-comers. Packing it all in on this card when they do so little every other card of the year. And then Jacoby Smith is, of course, a very accomplished wrestler. Is he 3-time All-American? A very good wrestler. And they're feeding him Nico Price. Like, I've never seen a more obvious one. It's like when I was on holiday, I was getting tweets from people being like, did you see Malcolm Wellmaker? And I'm like, wasn't he fighting Chris Moutinho? What did you think was going to happen? I mean, I'm excited for Malcolm Wellmaker, but I don't need the boxing build-up. Boxcar Joe, Boxcar Sam, all those guys with boxcars. He keeps looking at the corner to check on his bindle. Beneil Dariush and Renato Moicano. I mean, Dariush is washed. I think we're agreed on that. He's 36, but I think having the old salt and pepper hair makes him look older. But this is another one where I was like, I wish he'd got to fight Makhachev before he had this drop-off, because Beneil Dariush has insane takedown defense. He's just been brilliant against everyone. So it would have been an interesting aspect there. He's also a southpaw, and if you remember Poirier versus Makhachev was a lot sloppier when he was fighting a fellow southpaw and didn't have sort of that usual matchup where he's the guy who's familiar with the matchup and the opponent's less familiar with it. But then Benny's chin disappeared. Charles Oliveira head kicked him and then beat him up with ground and pound, and then Arman Sarukian touched him and he fell over, and it's been 2 years almost since then. So Renato Moicano gets a chance to get a knockout on his record, maybe. It does. I mean, it's kind of interesting because Moicano's been falling back on his wrestling a lot more recently. And if you remember Dober, Jalen Turner, Benoit Saint-Denis, all very wrestling heavy fights. Even though he's got a good jab and decent combinations, he got himself into trouble striking a few times and said, I'm going to do Damian Maia. I'm going to stick to what I know. Met Islam Makhachev at the height of his powers. One of Islam Makhachev's most impressive victories for me. Got a short arm dast, which is something that I've been working like every day since then. But if he comes with the wrestling heavy game plan against Beneil Dariush, I can't see Dariush's clinch work. I mean, physical strength will wane, but it's not like his chin. His chin is the thing that we're all like, oh, is that gone? I can't see him not still being an absolute hoss in the clinch and hard to get off his feet. So it's one of those ones where you're looking at it going, if Moicano touches this man's chin, he might just implode. But if Moicano does what Moicano normally does, he might be taking the path of most resistance. Be nice to see Beneil Dariush get one in the win column again, after such a run and then such a drop-off, because he was on I think it was 7-fight win streak? No, 8-fight win streak. Moises, Dober, Camacho, Close, Holtzman, Ferreira, Ferguson, Gamrot. 3 of those guys were elite. One of those guys was the ghost of Tony Ferguson. But again, start of that win streak is, 7 years ago. Start of this losing streak is 3 years ago. But then he, again, even against Charles Oliveira, he looked good until he didn't. And then the Sarukian one was so quick that we don't really know anything about it. We just know that chin looked a little bit sus, had a long layoff. I think he lost the Moicano fight. Yeah, they booked the Moicano fight for UFC 311. Makhachev lost his opponent in Sarukian. Moicano went to fight Makhachev. So I hope they paid Dariush a good sum for losing his fight the week of, I think it was like the day before, wasn't it? It all fell through. It was GoofCon 1, as they call it on Reddit. Anything else? Peyton Talbot versus Felipe Lima. People have been really hot on Lima, and I'm just not as hot on him. Maybe I'm just a simple striking guy where I see Peyton Talbot going bonk and people falling over and I go, that guy's the future. And then Felipe Luma is grappling people and doesn't have bonk. And I'm going, but does he have bonk? But Lima looked good against Miles Johns, and before that against... I mean, it was a fairly competitive fight with Miles Johns, but finished Naimov, who is a filthy fucking cheat. Came in from Octagon having been the champion, which is crazy that they let him go. Really weird, because if he keeps winning here, we're like, that's the most promising guy in MMA. If he'd stayed in Octagon, people would have been like, well, he's fighting in Octagon. It's a real pickle if you're trying to make a star somewhere else, because everyone will just go, oh, well, he's not doing it against the best in the world, is he? No one was getting excited to watch Felipe Lima in Octagon. You're not now going to go back and go like, oh, I'm going to watch all Felipe Lima's Octagon fights. They couldn't make him a star, and now he's come to the UFC and he might become a star. Relatively speaking, the sort of fight night star, not the Conor McGregor star, which is never going to happen again. Love this fight. I mean, Talbot has some questions to answer after getting sort of manhandled by the ghost of Jaime Barcelos. He still looked dangerous when he got his stuff going on the feet. It was kind of weird because I'd seen him fight guys who wanted to take him down, and he was framing off him, he was getting his head low, head blocking, he was making it really hard for them and hitting them with good shots as they came up from their knees and so on. If you watch his, whatever Uriah Faber's place is called, A1 fights, everyone wants to take him down, and he's just limp-legging away, pushing them off, hitting them with a counter shot, and they look like they're having a horrible time. And then Randy Barcelos, Barcelos was actually a pretty good wrestler in his own right. Wasn't he like Brazilian national squad or something like that? But he just had a hard-ass time. But then Felipe Lima, his striking hasn't looked amazing, so there's the open. It's kind of like both guys' worse areas may play into the other. Jack Hermansson versus Gregory Rodriguez. Man, it's been a while since Jack Hermansson fought. It was the February of 2024 that he derailed the Joe Piper hype train. No news of a booked fight cancelled or an injury or anything. Gregory Rodriguez coming off that banger where he was on the losing end against Jared Cannonier. Jared Cannonier versus MVP was signed while I was away, by the way. So I was like, what a weird fight that I'd never thought of, but now I'm actually quite interested in. That's what matchmaking should be. That should be Sean Shelby's job. There should be one of those a month where I go, oh, never thought of that. Cool. But then it came out that I think it was Joe Riggs, who's a friend and training partner of Jared Cannonier, said that the UFC had hinted that he might be on the chopping block if he didn't take this fight. And it's like, he's coming off the most interesting fight of his life and probably best performance of recent career. And he's headlined in 8 of his last 10 fights. He's an absolute workhorse, and that's how you thank him. But this sport is real shitty. I mean, I was watching, my wife was watching the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders documentary, which I think is I watched it and I was like, do you know what? Maybe Khomeini is right about Western decadence. But, the amount that they're hyping up how many people want to see the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. They're hyping out the stadiums they fill, the events they go to, the bookings they take. And then they're saying, one of them's asking for, a living wage because they have to work a second job. And the bitch who's in charge goes, but isn't it the fact that you have to work a second job that makes it so impressive what you do? The most sinister shit I've ever heard. And I thought I was looking at Dana White. I was like, that is absolutely the fighting world logic. It's like, we can't pay you the money that you're earning us. We can't pay you what you're worth because you might not want to fight anymore, which again, any elite boxer still fights all the time. If you give people money, they still want to pile up as much money as possible while they're young and healthy. Fighter pay rant, bet you've missed that. Anyway, Hermansson Rodriguez, don't care, but it might be all right. Haider Emil versus Jose Delgado, they're both decent. Vivian Araujo versus Tracy Cortez. Oh, Tracy Cortez, you were headlining, and now you're just the undercard on some card because you lost to the ghost of Rose Namajunas. I have never cared about watching Tracy Cortez, to be honest. Hey, Borshev's on against Terence McKinney. That's good matchmaking. You've got 2 incredibly flawed guys who we still want to keep around. Terence McKinney is not going to take Borshev down. the one thing that should be illegal in any Borshev fight. And Borshev is going to stand and bang with the guy who wants to either knock out or get knocked out in the first minute. Terence McKinney is how I approach most problems in life. I give it a good shot. I take a run up at it. I hit it with my shoulder. And if it doesn't move, I go, well, there's always next time. And I lay down and the referee waves the fight off. In this metaphor. Anyway, Jacoby Smith's fighting Nico Price. He's pretty good. His hands are decently heavy for a wrestler. He looks pretty competent on the feet for a wrestler. And he does some cool stuff in the wrestling. If you watched it, what was it? It might have been his Contender Series fight. He gets behind the guy with a body lock and the guy goes quad pod, hands and feet on the floor. And Jacoby Smith jumps up and slams his knee down on the back of the guy's knee. Absolutely brutal. It reminded me of Marcelo Garcia when he used to grapple against giants like Rico Rodriguez. He'd get behind, and Gabriel Gonzaga, two UFC heavyweight champions there, and this guy weighed 67 kilos at his best. He'd get behind them, and he couldn't lift them, and he couldn't trip them because they were gigantic. So he got the body lock, and he jumped and put his feet in the back of their knees, and then just sort of sagged back. It's absolutely brutal when you see him do it. Two more fights that I don't really care about, but always willing to be surprised. That is the beginning of the Only Bangers era. What else is going on? There's boxing-wise, we've got a Eubank who isn't actually Eubank. He's the cousin of Chris Eubank Jr., which makes him the... Does that make him the second cousin? No, it makes him the nephew of the legitimate Chris Eubank that we all actually care about. And Jake Paul's fighting. So the UFC's going up against the biggest attraction in combat sports. But I'm your boy Jack Slack. Go and read the Ilya Topuria article. Be on the lookout in the coming weeks for articles about UFC 318, because that's what I'm going to start doing, talking big fights. I'm Big Fight Jack, and I'm back. Sign up to Patreon, support the podcast, be a boy, and I'll catch you Monday to talk about how this one went. Cheers. John Jones LARPing with a bunch of old men in camo, bless.